Is there someone who comes to mind right away? Someone who just makes you uncomfortable? Someone you don't want to get close to? Someone you can't even clearly explain why, but you just want to avoid? Honestly, that feeling isn't strange. 2,000 years ago, the Jews felt the exact same way. For them, that person was the Samaritan. And yet Jesus chose that very person as the hero of the story. We've heard the story of the Good Samaritan so many times that we tend to think of it as just a story about being kind. But to the people listening back then, this parable was not a warm, comforting story. It was almost shocking, because Jesus was not simply saying, "Be nice." He was saying this: even through the person you most want to keep at a distance, the love of God can be revealed. That's what Jesus was saying. So this story is not just a lesson from history. It is about the very person you have been trying to avoid, and about a question you may have never seriously asked yourself. First, we need to understand this. Jews and Samaritans were not complete strangers. They came from the same roots. Maybe that's what made it even harder. Because they were close, the division between them ran even deeper. After Israel was divided, wars and migrations kept happening in the northern region of Samaria, and the people gradually became mixed. The Jews looked at that and thought, those people are not pure. Their faith has been compromised. They are different from us. And it didn't stop there. They were also divided over where the center of worship should be. The Jews held Jerusalem as sacred, while the Samaritans held Mount Gerizim as sacred. On the surface, it may seem like just a disagreement about location, but underneath it was a much sharper question. Who are the true people of God? Who is worshiping the right way? What happens when a question like that builds up for hundreds of years? It doesn't stay at the level of simple tension. People grow uncomfortable with each other, then suspicious of each other, then dismissive of each other, and eventually hateful. So to the Jews of that time, Samaritans were not just unfamiliar people. They were people they did not want close, people they did not want to mix with. To be honest, people they wanted to look down on. And Jesus made that very person the hero. The story begins like this. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him, beat him badly, and left him on the road. He was half dead. Then someone came by, a priest. In those days, a priest was not just a religious man. He represented the people before God. He knew the law better than anyone. He was supposed to understand the heart of God more than anyone else, but he simply passed by. Then a Levite came along, and he too passed by. At this point, we may want to quickly say, those were bad men. But maybe they had their reasons. Maybe they were afraid of becoming ceremonially unclean. Maybe they thought it was dangerous. Maybe they had somewhere urgent to be. They probably had their own logic, their own justification. And honestly, so do we. We're busy. It's not our business. We don't want to get involved. We wonder what difference it would make, even if we did help. But then someone stopped, someone nobody expected, a Samaritan. And you have to pay close attention to what he did. He didn't just feel sorry and move on. He went closer. He bandaged the man's wounds himself. He poured oil and wine on them to treat him. He put him on his own animal and took him to an inn. He cared for him there. And the next day, he even left money behind. He said that if there were any extra expense, he would pay it when he returned. This is not just simple kindness. This is responsibility. This is devotion. He treated someone who meant nothing to him as if he were his own. Whether anyone was watching or not, whether anyone praised him or not, he stopped because that person needed help in that moment. And then Jesus asks, which of these three do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? That question is so important. Because the original question was this. A lawyer had asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? That question is really about setting limits. How far do I have to love? How much responsibility do I really have? It's the kind of question that wants to draw a line. But Jesus completely turns the question upside down. Instead of asking who your neighbor is, ask yourself whose neighbor you are being. That difference is everything. The person who keeps defining who counts as a neighbor is drawing lines. The person who becomes a neighbor is erasing lines. Jesus is telling us not to draw those lines. But there's one more thing we need to think about. Why a Samaritan? If Jesus had made just some kind traveler the hero, this would have been a much easier story. It would have ended as a touching, warm, agreeable lesson. But Jesus deliberately chose a Samaritan. That was not an accident. Jesus knew exactly what made his listeners uncomfortable, and he touched that discomfort head on. The person you avoided, the person you looked down on, the person you did not want near you. That very person is showing the heart of God right now. What an uncomfortable message. Because deep down, we tend to think like this. Good people will be on our side. The people God uses will be the ones we feel comfortable with. But God is always bigger than our expectations. He works beyond our narrow standards. Right at the place where we have drawn the line, God tells us to begin love. And there is one more surprising fact. Samaritans are not just a name that disappeared into the pages of the Bible. There is still a real community today, carrying on that tradition. The numbers are very small, but they still live in that land, preserving their identity and traditions. A name once treated as a symbol of contempt has survived thousands of years and still remains. And that name still asks us the same questions today. Who are you keeping at a distance? Who have you refused to recognize as your neighbor? And before whom are you willing to stop? Is there someone coming to mind right now? Someone who makes you uncomfortable in a way you can't fully explain? Someone you feel a wall with? Someone you just don't understand? Someone you keep avoiding because they are different from you? If someone has come to mind, then maybe this message is for you today. God grows our faith. Right in the very place where we most want to draw the line. Through that person, he teaches us his heart. And by training us to stop in front of that person, he makes us deeper people. That is why the story of the Good Samaritan is not just about being nice. It is a much more uncomfortable, much deeper story. Do not judge people by your standards. Even in the person you have pushed away, the heart of God is still moving. And finally, the question Jesus left us stands before us again today. Before asking, "Who is my neighbor?" ask this. Whose neighbor am I being right now?